I beg you to try it, Patricia.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricia. You dare once in your life.
Hi, people. Trish Wood here. And as I said in the Substack that I put out today, there's not going to be a full show like we do every week because I'm not feeling very well. And it's a weird kind of a thing because I'll have an hour or two of feeling, hey, I'm getting better. I'll feel better later. I'll start making plans to do something. And then I'm not better. I'm kind of going back down the hill with a sore throat and tons of fatigue. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to bore you with my physical complaints. I'm just telling you why you're not getting a full show. I wasn't going to do a show at all. And this is what a crazed podcaster I am. The idea of you guys, I think most of you probably listen on Saturday. It drops on Sunday night, it drops on Friday night. Hello. And you probably listen to it on Saturday. And the idea that you would go with trust to your feed, however you get it, delivered to you and not have anything there, it was just too hard for me to even contemplate. So I thought, okay, I did this once during COVID where I was too sick to do a full show, but I left a note kind of, really dragging my butt. Oh, I've got COVID. I can't perform. But so I'm not that sick, but I am under the weather and I didn't want to leave you hanging, because I know that these shows I think they might be for you what Tucker has been to me. And that's just hearing a person you trust who's moderately reasonable, especially during weird times, is a bit comforting. I've come to accept that, because that's what some shows are for me too. So this has been a week where we all need comforting, where the information onslaught, the propaganda, the cruelty, the nastiness, the lying is off the charts. Of course it is, people, because we're going to war. They're going to war and they may drag us in. But to be cliche, the first casualty of war is truth. We all know that. We seem to forget it every war, don't we? Oh, this time it's like Lucy and the football. This time they're not going to lie to us to get us to go into it. This time they're not going to demonize and dehumanize the enemy. It's going to be, fair play. And that never happens and it never will happen. It's just the nature of the thing. But it's very difficult for me to watch because as a former journalist, seeing CNN, which I hate anyway, but watching them cover the story of the war on Hamas now after Hamas's terroristic incursion into Israel, just the worst thing ever, almost unspeakably grim and gruesome. And the photographs coming out and the video coming out is terrible. So yeah, there's a war going on. But CNN and Fox News, wow, is it embarrassing itself? It really, I got to tell you, I stopped watching Fox when Tucker left. Tucker was for good or ill, he wasn't a perfect and isn't a perfect guy, but he did help me at 8:00 each night kind of square away my thinking at the end of a difficult day during a difficult time. And I looked forward to that ritual. My husband and I would have dinner. We'd always stay up till, even though we go to bed super early because we're old, but we'd always stay up for Tucker. And my best girlfriend also is a bit of a Tucker fanatic. So she and I would discuss Tucker the next morning. Was he full of it? Did we agree? Usually we agreed with him. But he was always a bit of a reset because he pulled into his discussions of things that on the surface were not that meaningful. They were just kind of annoyances, but he would bring in historical data points that really made me fully understand what was going on. And I'll give you an example of that. And that is, for instance, when Trump was first running in 2016 and promising the working class, mostly white people, but not only white people, that he was going to bring jobs back because he was talking about this terrible poverty down, in Appalachia, where the deaths of despair, as they're called, from unemployment and hopelessness are off the charts, and fentanyl has worked its way in. So he was talking about how important it was for America, and especially certain regions and the areas that support the working class where they live, to be revitalized by making these big corporations do their manufacturing in America again. Sorry, you're going to sell stuff here, you better build it here. You're an American company. That makes perfect sense to me. And I remember when I realized the genius of Tucker, because I'd forgotten that it was McKinsey and Company, the consulting firm, that had gone around to these big corporations and said, well, wow, if you offshore your manufacturing, you can save 40%. I mean, all your workers will commit suicide from despair and the country will go to hell in a handcart, but you'll say, that's what was happening. And it was Tucker who always brought in that little piece and put in perspective what had happened. And I remember even one time he had, the head of McKinsey, who foolishly agreed to come on the show. No, remember at the end of Tucker, nobody would come on to be interviewed unless they were people who agreed with Tucker. So nobody in an adversarial position would go on because he always knocked the crap out of them. But this happened at a time when nobody had figured that out yet. So this guy, this big mucky muck from McKinsey, was on, trying to defend the indefensible, which was ruining the working class and sending all the good union jobs overseas. And Tucker really let him have it. And I was cheering for that. So that's the beauty of Tucker. He always brought something to the story that I maybe knew and had forgotten, or gave me a new way of looking at it. And so I miss him desperately. I'll be honest with you, I'm not getting the same thing from his shows on Twitter. He's not doing enough monologues. I think, hey, Tucker, if you're listening, if anybody knows Tucker, send him this show, because he should be doing still a monologue every night if he can. Maybe legally he's not allowed to. I know there was some contractual issue, but I need Tucker's monologues every night, especially during this time. And if not Tucker, then someone equally smart. And there's nobody at Fox who can even really carry his briefcase. That was a bit of a diversion, and I'm sorry. I want to get back to the war coverage. So I don't watch Fox at all anymore, unless there's some specific thing I want, like, say, maybe the Republican debates, which were actually a joke. I mean, it felt like end of times for news, and we've had many of those. But I've turned it on to monitor how they're covering the situation in Israel and Gaza. And I was sort of wondering, well, I agree with Fox on a lot of things, so maybe they'll be doing something more on what I think is kind of the right side of this, which is a really temperate, understanding kind of position that recognizes the pain on both sides while completely hating the violence that was perpetuated by Hamas going into Israel. So I turned it on, and what I heard on Fox and what I heard on CNN, and of course all the other stations too, except the really far left ones like MSNBC is sort of pro-Hamas, which is weird, but was this propaganda. Like everything Netanyahu said was true. Everything Biden said was true. Everything the IDF said about what they were doing was true. And everything the other side said, regardless of what was coming from a Palestinian or Hamas spokesman, obviously they don't have a lot of credibility and shouldn't have, was a lie, right? So why are you doing even a newscast? That's not a newscast. It's just you've become the comms department for the American State Department. That's kind of what's happening on those channels. And I get an upset stomach. I get so upset watching them lying. And the other thing you'll notice is a lot of personal stories, right? They're not giving us proper historical analysis of what happened, what led up to this, why was there this massive, massive security failure, which I'll talk about in a minute. None of the kind of important news points that really need to be picked apart. They're giving you firsthand accounts of people whose children are missing or their husband was kidnapped. And those are all, listen, the human interest story is now the bread and butter of news stations, mostly because people writing them are lazy and they're easy interviews to do. I hate to say it, but it's much easier than learning something and doing a proper analysis. But it also serves as a propaganda tool because it continues to show that this was a terror and that this terror is worthy of a response that is unrestrained. And therefore, Israel and the IDF can do nothing wrong. That's what they're doing. That is what the propaganda is all about. And I feel like I want to say to people, where were you in the Gulf War? Where were you in the Iraq War? Where were you? They heard you probably were born for Vietnam, but they lied about that too, Gulf of Tonkin. They always lie to get people to support a war. Full stop. Colin Powell went in front of the United Nations and told a whopper about weapons of mass destruction, didn't he? And the Kuwait story, which is in my latest Substack, and you should go there and watch it because this made me very emotional. I'm emotional even talking about it. This story was broken. It was Fifth Estate, my old show. I was working there at the time. I was not the journalist on the story. It was Lyndon McIntyre who did it. And he doesn't like me and I don't like him, but I'm not ever going to criticize his journalism. This is an amazing story and he gets full props. It's actually so good that I was emotional because they're not doing anything like that anymore. They're just not even close. It's not even the same planet of journalism as what this story is about. Here's the story, and you can go to my Substack and watch the video. The story is that during the first Gulf War, Kuwait was really keen to get American ground troops brought in to help them fight off the Iraqis. And there was some discussion about it, as there should have been. And the next thing you know, just kind of before a vote about whether American ground troops will be committed, a story emerges. And it's from a young nurse who works in a hospital who claims that Iraqi soldiers stormed through the hospital, unplugging the incubators in the NICU, which is the neonatal intensive care unit, taking the babies out of the incubators and throwing them on the ground to die. Big drama. Story heard around the world. Totally fake. Didn't happen. And what the Fifth Estate showed with Harper's Magazine, who also did an investigation, was that the young woman who was the so-called nurse from the so-called NICU was actually the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador who'd desperately been begging America to commit troops. But of course, by the time we find out that it's a fake story, it's all over. It's already happened. Nobody gets punished. Nobody was punished for WMD. That big lie. And Phil Donahue lost his show over it. I don't know if you remember that. He had a show on MSNBC and he had maybe Scott Ritter or somebody on saying there are no WMD. And whammo, he was fired because you're not allowed to expose the phony war narrative that drives the West into these conflicts. It was really like a warm bath, in a sense, to watch that kind of reporting. Just absolutely terrific, spot on, great. Props to Lyndon McIntyre and the Fifth Estate from 1992, I believe it was. I had just started there. I think I'd been there for maybe 2 years. And my first big story for the Fifth Estate was, guess where? In Israel and the West Bank. So I'll be talking about that on another show, since I think this story is going to stay in the spotlight for a while, but I won't tell you that story today. I did learn a lot though, and I did develop some opinions, which I will also share. So the story about the babies and the incubators matters because I had, as I explained in that Substack, a very surreal experience this week, where there was a story that came forward, I guess about 3 or maybe 4 days now. Young female reporter, attached to the IDF, Israeli Defense Force, drops a story, 40 babies beheaded in this kibbutz, which had been overtaken by Hamas terrorists who'd gone in and made a slaughter, which totally happened. Not disputing that at all. But a phrase came out that the babies had been beheaded babies. And that phrase, as grim as it is, became a kind of a mantra. Even now, they're using it. So once that story was broadcast from quite an unknown reporter, I'd never seen this woman before. She was nobody special. But that line served a purpose, and it went round the world. And even as of yesterday, reporters were talking about beheaded babies as the worst atrocity of all time. Joe Biden talked about it at a news conference. He even lied and said he'd seen photographs of beheaded babies. I mean, it was nuts. So why am I telling you this? Because when I heard the phrase beheaded babies and saw how it had ripped through legacy media as a truth and as what was becoming the casus belli, meaning the reason, the motivation for going to war, and an unrestrained war against the Palestinians, I had a feeling that it wasn't true. It just did not ring true. And I'm not saying it didn't ring true because Hamas are not doing terrible things. They totally are. I've seen video and pictures of it. But the story felt too pat and, in a sense, too perfect, because Israel and America wanted a way and have been looking for a way to get this enthusiastic support for Israel going into Gaza, which it's doing any minute. It's already bombarding. And to use the phrase beheading links Hamas very directly, tactically, to ISIS. ISIS, we in the West understand, right? We know about the beheadings. Many of us in journalism saw the videos. We remember Danny Pearl. I don't know if he was beheaded by ISIS, but he was beheaded during that terrible time when they were doing that. So the minute that Hamas was linked to ISIS in that way through the beheading babies catchphrase, there was absolutely no redemption at all in any way, shape, or form. And people in the West could support Israel doing terrible things in Gaza, which they are about to do. Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone, who's very much more invested in the Palestinian side than I am at this point, or at least I'm going to talk about anyway at this point. He also was doing some investigation about it. So it turns out that the general who started the story is a settler, a very aggressive settler, had been in some skirmishes with Palestinians even prior. He was a reservist and had been causing some trouble there. So little bit dubious there. But every single story that quoted this beheaded babies thing always circulated back to him. So people would say, no, there's new proof. Look at this. And I would look at the story and it would say, an Army general, IDF Army general says, or soldier says. And so it was like the dossier, right? The Trump dossier. It was always sourced back to this one thing that didn't have a ton of credibility. What happened then? Then the story morphed and changed. Well, they weren't all beheaded. Maybe it was just some of them. Maybe they weren't beheaded, but mutilated. All of this kind of really weird stuff. So then I'm not going to get into arguments with people on Twitter and other places about the degree of damage to an infant. I mean, that's just grotesque, right? But the point is that they were backing away from the story, as did the White House. The White House comms team put out a notice saying, oh, we have no independent verification of the beheaded baby story. We don't know that, there's a bunch of that. The Israeli government backed away from it at one point, and a couple of media outlets said, yeah, no, it didn't happen, or we can't prove it happened, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all fine. I have no skin in the game about whether it happened or not. I just felt like it was probably a propaganda technique that had happened maybe inadvertently and taken off, probably got a bit of a life of its own because it served a purpose. You'll hear it now that I've mentioned it. You'll hear it constantly in news coverage. That's what I was trying to expose for people. I thought they'd find it interesting There is something called atrocity propaganda. It has existed through history. We saw it with Kuwait, and we've seen it in other places. So what happened was, and this really, I'd never been subjected to this before, but a few people accused me of being a Holocaust denier. Someone else suggested that that quibbling about atrocities was like quibbling about how many people died just awful stuff. And I thought, wow, we're in a place, I think, where people's sensitivities are running very, very high. And I'm not going to argue with people about those things. At the end of the day, does it really matter? It'll get sorted out, I suppose, later. Someone will write a huge book about it as the casus belli for what's about to go down in Gaza. And that'll be fine. I'm not trying to win the argument. But it did highlight that we are in a time right now, like we were, I hate to say it, during COVID, where facts are actually, or challenges are actually offensive to some people because they're emotionally distraught, which I completely understand. One of the people who was being pretty aggressive about the baby story being true is a guy who was very cynical about legacy media and President Biden and vaccines and mandates. I mean, he was all in on this. So we're supposed to believe that legacy media that's been lying to us for years on virtually every subject is all of a sudden telling the truth about everything. I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling, isn't it? Anyway, I didn't want to spend any time this week debating how babies died. And you'll probably hear that they were photos. The photos don't show at all what people suggest they're showing. And that's all I'm going to say. They don't. Yeah, it's just it's informationally, this is such a hard time right now. So here's what I will say to you. If you feel like it, to go to Channel 4, go to YouTube and go to Channel 4 News. It's a British channel, and I think they might be like a little bit left of center. I'm not sure what they are, but their coverage has been really even-handed, and their coverage of what is about to transpire in Gaza and is transpiring in Gaza is terrific. So, give them a try. I like them a lot. And let me know in the Substack I posted today how that is working out for you. Channel 4. And then watch Channel 4, do an experiment, watch Channel 4 and then go to CNN and then go to Fox News. And you like the things people like Harris, what's her name? Harris Faulkner, whatever her name is. She's like, oh, she's just like insanely going through every possible terrible thing that happened. And, it was very, I don't know, people are kind of losing it. And the other thing I just want to say, there's been a lot of crying on TV too, right? John Kirby, I think his name is, from the State Department, was sobbing about something. Anderson Cooper was crying. And then there was a female CNN reporter who was weeping. I've never seen anything like it. I was in true crime for many, many decades, and I saw stuff that would blow your mind, including having a very, very up close and personal relationship with the Ted Bundy murder file photos and stories. Some of them just unspeakably awful. And I do cry sometimes privately. I even sometimes get a little choked up just for a second on this show if some big thing is happening, but I always catch myself. I don't think news people and pot should be blubbering. I think it's undignified and it feels kind of fake to me. I get it. It's a war zone. I get it. There were terrible atrocities. I get it. But wow, that's your job. And it's maybe instead of trying to elicit sympathy or clicks with how great and empathetic you are, you should be out there actually reporting and doing your job, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that isn't being said on Fox News and is not being said on CNN. And that is some of the commentary coming out of Israel. The president I saw on Channel 4, and the host who was interviewing him said something like, how are you going to justify all the civilian casualties that will happen in Gaza when you unleash, the fourth ring of hell on them, which you're going to do. And he did not have a good answer. He was kind of defending Israel's position to do that. And I thought, wow, if anybody else did that, people would be upset. Why is there a free pass given for this? Yes, it was terrible, but the civilians in Gaza didn't do it. And that's called collective punishment. And it is, I'll use the phrase, a war crime. So I said in the Substack piece, I hope cooler heads prevail. I don't believe that that's what the Israeli people really want. I know they need to feel secure. They deserve to feel secure. They've faced an existential threat. In the diaspora, they've faced idiots like our prime minister clapping for Nazis, and they've got a bunch of stupid university students running around, throwing demonstrations, cheering on to decolonize, or whatever the stupid phrase is, cheering for violence against Jewish people. That is just absolutely disgusting. So don't think I don't get it. I don't get it like you get it because I'm not Jewish, but I'm watching and I'm seeing these things. I really am. But I think there will be a lot of regret when the pictures come out from Gaza about what's about to happen there. And I hope that someone is urging restraint in Netanyahu's ear. I heard today, just before I sat down to do this, that there was some discussion with one of I think there was an American general over there, and there was the word restraint was not used. So I am fearful. Because what we need to understand too is if all hell breaks loose and there are tens of thousands of casualties in Gaza, for every one of those casualties are 10 angry jihadis born. Have we been letting them in through the southern border in America? Have they been sneaking across here? I don't know. I don't in any way want to engender any Islamophobia. That's not who we are on this show. But what I saw today around the world, teacher stabbed in France, a diplomat stabbed, I think, in Tokyo. What the hell is going on? Who are these people? We need to know who these people are, and these silly, silly children at university need to be yanked out of their classes that involve postmodernism right now, and those departments in universities in Canada should be shut down immediately if that's what they're breeding, because that is absolutely unacceptable. And I am a person, having been to the West Bank, having exposed an Israeli Defense Force war crime from 1967, when Yitzhak Rabin was kind of running the war over there. I interviewed Mr. Rabin about it. We had a nice discussion. I know something about it, right? I have some sympathy for the Palestinian position. But what these kids are doing and these stupid unions out there are absolutely unspeakably cruel to the Jewish diaspora in this country right now. They could have waited to show their solidarity for Palestinians without cheering on what Hamas did. This is madness. This is psychopathy. This is mental illness that's going on right here. And we're seeing that play out in real time. We need to have a big discussion about that. And that's something that I will book on my show in the future. So, I'm not going to talk too much longer. I will say that you should try to watch To Sell a War, which I linked to. That's the Fifth Estate piece in my Substack. I'm going to read something for you written by Gabor Mate. He's a Canadian psychotherapist. He's the guy that did the show with Harry. I didn't like it very much because I don't like Harry. I think he whines too much. But he wrote this very thoughtful piece. It's not written, I don't think. I think it's a transcript of something he said to Russell Brand, if I'm allowed to mention that name anymore, about how he feels about being Jewish at this time. So I'm just going to read a little bit of it. I'm personally a Holocaust survivor. As an infant, I barely survived. My grandparents were killed in Auschwitz, and most of my extended family were killed. I became a Zionist. This dream of the Jewish people resurrected in their historical homeland, and the barbed wire of Auschwitz being replaced by the boundaries of a Jewish state with a powerful army. And then I found out that it wasn't really like that, that in order to make this Jewish dream a reality, we had to visit a nightmare on the local population. There's no way you could ever have created a Jewish state without oppressing and expelling the local population. Jewish Israeli historians have shown without a doubt that the expulsion of Palestinians was persistent, pervasive, cruel, and with deliberate intent. That's what's called the Nakba in Arabic, the disaster or the catastrophe. There's a law that you cannot deny the Holocaust, but in Israel, you're not allowed to mention the Nakba, even though it's at the very basis of the foundation of Israel. I'm reading that because what he is capturing there, number one, is the thinking of a lot of these wonderful, peace-loving Israelis who have tried very hard to support and bring the Palestinians into a process that will make everybody's life better. Many, many Israelis feel the way that Gabor Mate has articulated in this note. And I think it's good to hear all sides. So that's one side. Let me just finish. He says, I visited the occupied territories, West Bank, during the first Intifada. I cried every day for 2 weeks at what I saw. The brutality of the occupation, the petty harassment, the murderousness of it, the cutting down of Palestinian olive groves, the denial of water rights, the humiliations, and this went on, and now it's much worse than it was then. So that's his view. Some people won't like that, but that's his view. And I did see some of that myself when I was in the West Bank in 1991, I believe it was. And there was a bit of intifada going on because they were throwing rocks at our car. We had an Israeli driver and a Palestinian fixer. And of course, they bickered all day long driving around the country. But our car had Israeli plates. So when we were in the West Bank, we stuck out like a sore thumb. And kids did throw rocks at the car because we had Israeli plates. That's a true thing. And we were never in any danger. But it's a thing. It's a very, very, very complicated place. And I think we have to be our best selves and our least tribal selves, if that's possible, especially at this time, to talk about it in a way that's not destructive for everybody in the conversation. Last thing, in the Substack, I refer to the great Cy Hirsch, who has a piece on his Substack. And as usual, he's knocking it out of the park. And it's about how Netanyahu was on the way out. He was done. He was toast. And I'm just going to read you this one paragraph. I think it's important. The most important thing I needed to understand, the Israeli insider told me, is that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is finished. He is a walking dead man. He will stay in office only until the shooting stops, maybe another month or two. He served as prime minister from 1996 until 1999, and again as leader of the right-wing Likud party from 2009 to 2021, returning for a third stint in late 2022. Bibi was always opposed to the 1993 Oslo Accords, the insider said, which initially gave the Palestinian Authority nominal control over both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. When he returned to office in 2009, the insider said, Bibi chose to support Hamas as an alternative to the Palestinian Authority and gave them money and established them in Gaza. So this is the stuff that CNN and Fox and the other airheads who are just whipping up hatred should be reporting on. Maybe interview one less victim and have one less mental breakdown on TV and actually do some historical reporting, or what Cy Hirsch has done. This isn't even historical. This is about what's happening right now. This is interesting because I'm just going to finish with this point. This is explosive. The attack by Hamas was a direct result of a decision Bibi made over the protest of local military commanders. to allow a group of Orthodox settlers to celebrate Sukkot in the West Bank. Sukkot is an annual fall holiday that commemorates the ancestral journey of the Jews into the depths of the desert. It is a week-long festival that is observed by building an outdoor temporary structure known as a sukkah. Excuse my pronunciation, Jewish friends, I'm just guessing, in which all could share the food that their predecessors ate and viscerally connect to the harvest season. The request came at a time of extreme tension over another West Bank incident in which Jewish settlers, according to the Associated Press, rampaged through a flashpoint town on October the 6th and killed a 19-year-old Arab male. The youth's death, the AP report added, marked the latest in a surge in Israeli-Palestinian fighting that so far killed nearly 200 Palestinians this year, the highest yearly death toll in about 2 decades. The Sukkot celebration, held near a Palestinian village known in Hebrew as Hawara, I hope I've got that right, would need extraordinary protection given the tension over the latest violence, and the local Israeli military authorities, with the approval of Netanyahu, ordered 2 of 3 army battalions, each with about 800 soldiers, that protected the border with Gaza, to shift their focus to the festival. That left only 800 soldiers, the insider told me, to be responsible for guarding the 51-kilometer border between the Gaza Strip and southern Israel. That meant the Israeli citizens in the south were left without an Israeli military presence for 10 to 12 hours. They were left to fend for themselves, and that is why Bibi is finished. May take a few months, but he's over. The insider called the attack in southern Israel the great military failure in Israeli history, and pointed out that only soldiers were killed in the 73 war. The surprise attack on Yom Kippur, in which Israel was briefly overrun by Egyptian and Syrian troops. That's the 73 war. Only soldiers were killed. Last Saturday, 22 settlements in the south were under control of Hamas for hours, and they went house to house, slaughtering women and children. You're not hearing that on CNN, are you? No, it's a pretty important story. This is why Bibi is now wearing the mantle of the wartime president. People rally around, don't they? Even if the wartime president is responsible in some way for what happened, as much as that can be said. He didn't do it himself, but he maybe opened the door inadvertently a little bit. Same with Joe Biden, who's funding Iran like mad, $6 billion on top of 100 and something billion from under Obama. Why is the Obama-Biden doctrine to keep giving money to Iran, who hates the Jews, hates Israel, hates women? Why? Why are they giving them money? The word is some of that money may have been used to fund this event, and so Joe Biden is now on the warpath trying to look like a wartime president. And what's really interesting is that he and Netanyahu are supporting each other. Netanyahu isn't saying, which he should be saying, why are you funding Iran, our biggest enemy? He's not saying that. And why is that? Well, obviously, he's made a deal with Biden. Biden is all in for Israel going into Gaza in an unrestrained way, it would seem. And Biden is tamping down the ugly truth of how that slaughter may have been financed. It's all very Tony Fauci, isn't it? You know, create a virus, fight a virus, fund a war, fight a war. Isn't that what's going on? Anyway, it's grim. And like I said to you all, I'm not feeling all that well. So I'm going to sign off. There is a Substack up which deals with much of what I've said today. And so if you have comments, do leave them there. I had Scott Horton booked. I'm going to rebook him, and hopefully I can maybe get him for next week to talk about this. And I'll do another Substack or two. I've got some work from home type reporting on the trucker trial. I've got a couple of good sources down there in courtroom 5 in the Ontario Court of Justice on Elgin Street, where I was for a couple of weeks. So I'll write that up for you too as soon as I'm feeling up to it. And in the meantime, try to watch a bit of Channel 4. If your heart's full of hate right now on either side of this, Channel 4 might be a soft place to land. They're doing some really, really good work humanizing everybody. And the role of the warmonger is to dehumanize people. And the only way forward in this world right now is for us to rehumanize. After COVID, after the attacks on people who didn't take the vaccine, the legacy media attacks on all of us, dehumanizing us. They dehumanize the truckers. That's our work. The work of the awake people is to rehumanize everybody on both sides of this, especially. I'm not talking about the Hamas killers, but I am talking about the Palestinian people who are caught. And you will hear that they were told to leave and then they were told not to leave. That story is disputed about whether or not they can actually get out of Gaza. Where would they go? And if they did go, they might not be allowed back, which means, again, losing what they consider part of their homeland and living in a refugee camp. So, see, no one's telling you that. When they say, well, why aren't they leaving Gaza? They wouldn't be blown up then by the Israeli Defense Force. Why don't they just, go on a holiday or something? It doesn't work that way. Way more complicated. And that's why the Palestinians have been pissed off for a while. So pardon my French. Anyway, have a great weekend and do limit your exposure. Limit it. There's not all that much we can do right now, but be kind to each other and hope that at some point we'll get different Western leaders